So good morning. I switched to a headset because I talk with my hands. In fact, my husband's been known to say, can you say the same sentence while actually sitting on your hands? And I don't think I can. So these are my prop, and I'll wander around the stage a bit. I was a professor most recently for 10 years at University of Toronto. And I have to say that a lot, and I'll just tell you briefly about my own background. I consider myself like, how many people here have seen Forrest Gump? One of my favorites, right? So I feel like for me personally, I've been like the Forrest Gump of digital health and AI. So meaning, you remember the scene in the movie where he just starts running and he runs through all these milestones and landmarks, et cetera. Well, in my career, started about, I call it 25 plus, but it's really 30 years ago, US and Canada. Started working in EMR companies, electronic medical records, and very similar to this moment in AI. Tried to tell people, hey, it's really good, it's gonna save time, it'll do all of these great things. As Will said yesterday, it'll reduce your pajama time, it'll change everything. And here we were talking to these, small doctor practices in rural environments and saying, hey, just take this tech on. And the liability and the relationship impact and everything else will fall on your shoulders to actually roll it out. But you guys take it on and it will be better. So as soon as we learned to say, actually, and I was a EMR VP for a while, as soon as we learned to say, hey, you know what? It's really painful. It's kind of awkward. You have to learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Then we started to make some traction in the market. And the other thing we did was we started to talk to the people who are actually using it and the people who were actually being impacted by it. So this is the 90s in tech, right? So for me personally, I moved through US. I had my own company and consulting, did a lot of work in DC when the idea was, okay, if we're going to make people use this stuff, let's figure out how to have dialogue in government where it can actually come into use and usefulness in a meaningful way. And that term meaningful pops up again and again because there are very few measures and metrics that were back then for what meaningful use is. We're kind of there a little bit right now with AI. We've heard that in the talks. And then for me personally, moved back to Canada, I'm Canadian, and ended up after a bit in University of Toronto because there was this program called Master of Health Informatics, and all the things that us fools basically have been doing by making a lot of mistakes, getting our noses bloody, was all of a sudden being taught through a school of public health. I ended up becoming director of that program, building the executive program of that so people could stay in school and actually get into work directly from the program. So it's called a terminal degree. Not a very good name for a degree in healthcare, but it was like an MBA, right? It was like, how do we get people through, out, and into work? And the thing is, the recipe was simple. I got 350 students across that finish line into the health systems as digital health and AI leaders since 2016. And the recipe was very simple. It was essentially tell them two things. One, what you're taking out is who you were when you walked in, plus AI, right? So we heard about builders, we heard about different characters and characteristics. But this is where we are right now. AI is sort of an opportunity. It's us plus AI that equals how we're doing at work. And the challenge is what and how we're doing the work is not yet defined and is probably going to change. And one thing I really learned along the way was that the people who were actually getting hired were within a year or so defining the next roles. So the roles, as we've all heard, don't necessarily exist yet, that we'll be moving into in AI, but the people who are hired now who have some digital sense and sensibility are the ones who are starting to define, and we would see people come in and their roles and their pathways kind of take that sort of hockey stick curve up and into the systems. So that's just sort of a very broad introduction to myself. I then decided to take that amazingly and tenured track and in some ways cushy, very hard job at U of T and take what I always make sure to say is an early retirement and just create my own company in AI and infrastructure because some of us are built that way and it's a restlessness, as somebody said, and if you've got it, you can't really ignore it. So that's another message to people in the room. So how does that all tie into this? If AI did it, why am I explaining it? Number one, I want to say is that we're in a situation now where, and this is sort of a spoiler alert to the end of my talk, because it's really the substance of my talk. AI is behaving like a new medium. And what does that mean? A medium is something that changes behaviors and perceptions and actions in institutions, organizations, and culture. A medium is an intermediary, right? And so that is a different space than we've been. And what I'm asking you to do is think, what happens if I think of AI as a new medium, right? Does it give me a different mindset? I'm going to tell you that I have a humanities background. My doctorate was in semiotics and postmodernism and all this stuff. And then try showing up at school of public health in a research environment and saying, oh, from this perspective, it's a hard thing. And a lot of this stuff is because the terms that the humanities have to bring into policy, into science, et cetera, are useful, but we're not used to using them. There's not a lot of conflation because we've had a lot of pathways that have said, that's soft, that's not quite there. What's happening now, though, is that some of these terms and terminologies are coming into use, and not only with the sort of the softer side, but also with tech. So one thing I'm going to go through in this talk is what's happening in tech, where we're starting to take on having a sort of an understanding and authority even over tech language that has itself been very tried and true and long in being formed, right? How much do we have to change who we are? And my argument is we don't really. But we do have to be aware that there's a shift. And the mindset shift is something that has been so exciting for me at this conference. Every single talk I've been to, I've wanted to say yes and, right? Usually I come and I'm not trying to be smug, but I'll sit there I'm like, yeah, but. And now I'm like, yes, and. So I've changed the direction of this talk about 20 times. And what I will do now is go right into the meat of it. But I want to congratulate AICon in general. I want to thank Kanos. I want to thank Natasha and, my goodness, Conla for putting up with me, and everybody here, because we're in a situation now where we're actually sticking on the problem. People get scared of the word problem, but the problem is a source of discovery. We're not stuck in the problem. We're not stuck describing the problem. And that's where I'd say we have been. But being stuck in the problem and looking around it is what I used to get feedback from my students was one of the most valuable things they learned. They didn't like it at the time. They're like, let's just get through to the solution. But they come back and they're like, wait, when we're talking about the problem, when we're in discovery, we use the same terms. Things come up, themes come out. And when we hear them over and over, we start thinking for ourselves with them. So, well done, us. And well done, Nova Scotia. I was so impressed. Wow. AI is entering decisions from all directions, right? There's sanctioned, unsanctioned, there's formal, informal. Very important for distinction. operational, enterprise, consumer, and societal. We tend to conflate, what's happening with some of the Gen AI and some of the AI that was sort of more in, had kind of ivory tower type of enclosures. There's workflow-based, and there's workflow imposing, and there's shadow AI. And shadow is just, AI that's used from somewhere else, right? So much of it is already doing what a media does. It's explaining, it's helping us prioritize, trust, escalate, and institutions are now operating under what I would call a mixed intelligence situation, right? Think of this, however, and we've all been there. Sometimes we are there in our those nightmares where you're in your classroom and all of a sudden you haven't studied for your exam and all of a sudden you're asked for the answer, right? Something's questioned. You're in a meeting. Something's come from a co-pilot, a summary, a search, a dashboard, an assistant. It's been routed. It's been risk scored. It's got from old meeting notes. There's some sort of research synthesis. Nothing is good or bad on its own, but cumulatively, it's in the room, it has a form, something's flagged, and what happens? Everybody turns to the expert in the room, right? And they say, can you explain why this happened? So if somebody has this response, wait, I'm the human in the loop, they may be the people who don't actually understand that what is expected of them is to be that human who is the deciding factor. And the thing is that AI is not changing that expertise or responsibility, but where and when it's needed is maybe surprising. So the purpose of this slide is not to give people nightmares of having to study for exams, but it's to say human in the loop is not just a term of art, it's becoming a legal and regulatory term. And the way that it's becoming that term in regulation, legislation, and all of these different ways, as Will yesterday was talking about the EU Act a lot, it's not over there. It's influencing how interpretation, policy, guideline, et cetera, is made of human in the loop. Right now, the guiding premise of human in the loop is that human is embedded with the AI. Now think of that for a moment and think of how busy, I come from healthcare, everybody's so busy, and being embedded in AI and being that expert and the human in the loop. Before academia, I tried to, sell doctors' products saying, it's only 10 seconds at the point of care. Don't even try it because it doesn't work that way. Human on the loop, well, that's sort of an oversight, but what does that mean and what are the implications of being in that oversight role? AI did it somewhere over here, right? I'm not the one in there with it, but it did it. It's good for medium risk. The EU, by the way, just May 19th, pulled back on saying we must have humans in the loop for high risk. California's made 3 pieces of legislation that they pushed out and pulled back because risk is hard to work with, right? We know that. The people in this room know that. Human in command, that sounds good. It's actually a military term. But the thing is that we can say this is where the human authority and scope lies, but what does it actually mean, right? These are not terms, they're reassuring terms because it's the human and AI dialogue that we're talking about, but this is a case that has been emerging for a while. The quote at the bottom is not from the case, but it's related. It's we literally click and submit, 10 seconds to do 50 at a time. 50 what? In this case, Cigna, which is a really big insurer in the US, got flagged for having rejection rates that were spiking. So they had a period of time, 300 insurance claims reviewed and rejected, 300,000 rejected in a very short period of time. And somebody out there said, wait, what? It was reviewed, and the law said you must have a human to review it. in order for it to be done. You must have a human in the loop. But the humans were only given 1.2 seconds, and they had to be physicians. So the physicians had 1.2 seconds per claim. When these claims were re-examined, almost a high percent, I want to say 80%, the rejections were reversed. So the case is now a federal class action suit, and it's moving forward because, and this goes back to humans embedded. If you're going to embed a human, what these, I'm going to call them regs, et cetera, are saying, you've got to give people time, critical, not just nice, but critical in terms of the way it's going to be interpreted in terms of liability. You've got to give them a pathway to escalation. You have to say, if it's not right, go here, not just yay or nay. And you have to give them a clear understanding of their own accountability. So when you have AI coming in from everywhere, even if, one thing is 1% wrong and goes this way and it crosses over with something going that way, you're going to end up in a situation where it's almost impossibly hard to reconstruct and defend. And so this is a term you're going to hear over and over, explainability, right? Explainability seems like immediately explainable. Well, this is a term, and you can explain it. But it means something different in tech, to people, and in terms of process, right? So explainability is also very heavily to do with time. You can't, in my opinion, bolt on governance at the end, tell people to look backwards and say, oh yeah, I figured out what happened. It's not really doing anyone any good, and it's very, very hard to actually succeed in. Because real governance from AI done correctly should be the result of using AI. These are things that are happening with people. Automation bias, what's that? Over-trust AI under pressure. Vigilance decrement, what's that? High volume workflows. Okay, we're probably gonna push it through, except somebody probably checked somewhere because we're people and we accept that that's probably what happened. Or we accept that there's an acceptable risk. Accountability without infrastructure, right? And this is where we're starting to get into the actual challenge of what's going on. It's that infrastructure is surging ahead and bearing the weight of AI, while accountability is being dispersed across the system. So this is a key point. AI is not necessarily going rogue when things happen, right? But it's probably behaving the way it's meant to be behaving. How many people know the term RLHF? Okay, it's an acronym for reinforced learning with human feedback, right? So it's the way, let's say you have a model, something wrapping the model, the wrapper gives the instructions, model learns, and what the human does, it basically says, okay, here's the risk, here's a good thing, here's a bad thing, and it learns how to interact, right? So what happens is it creates confidence. It creates often what I call the semi-relevant. And the semi-relevant is something that makes sense and is really good and probably can be passed along, but it may not be the core of the truth, right? So what we're seeing, and there have been these very interesting studies about, executives, et cetera, and that feeling of confidence and how it feeds decisions. But get this, humans are also confidence-based. You don't really feel happy being a boss or learning from a boss who's going to tell you, well, you're wrong, this is bad, etc. So we're all in the loop, right? Of it's not just making people feel better, it's how we move forward. So confidence is related to authority, right? And confidence is something that in AI, what's happening is there's been this incredible link of the AI is confident, ranked that this is going well, or this is defensible, but it may not have anything to do with the decision that the human makes, right? So with just a short time left, I want to say that And, we've already had the maze analogy. I won't go too much into that. But friction is the point of what's going on right now. Friction is the point of sneakernet. It's the handoffs, the escalation ladders. It's all the stuff that also works right now, and it diffuses decisions, and it diffuses accountability, and it's the non-tech way we do things, right? So if you're looking at, and I'll end on this slide, if you're looking at what is actually happening here, my invitation to you is this, and this is the take back on Monday, right? AI is accelerating, human accountability persists, oversight's becoming a bit strained, intelligence becomes abundant, institutions adapt unevenly, authority signals before shifting, and judgment is harder to reconstruct. So I'm going rogue here. I'm going to finish with my last slide here, which is AI really is this medium that is reshaping how we interpret, coordinate. One thing that we have an opportunity to do here, and the people in this room have an opportunity to do, is look at how AI is at a medium between systems, between all of us. And the challenge isn't really, just say it's not right, or it's wrong, or it's good, or it's bad. I mean, that's not really going to do us a lot of good. It's basically saying, has this AI impacted situation actually had any ingredient where the decision or the authority is either hard to reconstruct, it's not explainable, it's questionable, and stop putting all of the liability on the shoulders of the human, and just take small moments to look at the system and say, yeah, it's a toddler, it's a new medium, we're using it, it's great, but maybe it is. And bring that into conversation, because conversation by conversation, that's actually how new medium comes into play, and we'll build all of that trust. So I want to thank you very much. I want to say genuinely what an incredible event this is, and I appreciate your attention.